6 a.m. BST, President Donald Trump is using Kim Jong Un as a diversion so he can launch a nuclear strike against ally China, it has been claimed. The U.S. president is reportedly disguising Washington's defense strategy, which features an attack against Beijing, with a plan to curb North Korean nuclear aggression. International expert and author James Petras said Donald Trump is using America's hostile situation with North Korea to prepare his army and initiate a surprise attack on China. Noon BST, visitors to North Korea are seeing more and more locally made products replace the mostly Chinese imports in shops and supermarkets, according to a new report from Reuters. Shop assistant Ri Kyung-suk, 33, said, "As new factories open, the branding, packaging and ingredients of our food products have improved." Andre Abrahamian, of Singapore-based Chosun Exchange, that trains North Koreans in business skills, said, around 2013, Kim Jong Un started talking about the need for import substitution. 3 p.m. BST, Moon Jae-in is the favorite to win Tuesday's election and become the first liberal president in South Korea in 9 years. It is thought Moon could take a softer line on North Korea after saying the nation has no choice but to recognize Kim Jong Un as leader of North Korea. "We can't deny that the ruler of the North Korean people is Kim Jong Un," he said in March. "We have no choice but to recognize Kim Jong Un as a counterpart, whether we put pressure and impose sanctions on North Korea or hold dialogue." 7 p.m. BST, ex-North Korean detainee Jeffrey Fowle opened up about his experiences in a North Korean prison. The 58-year-old father of 3 visited North Korea in May 2014 where he was arrested for leaving a Bible under a bin. North Korea is ranked number 1 on Open Doors' list of countries persecuting Christians. Tens of thousands of Christians are allegedly held in labor camps. "I advise anyone planning personal travel to North Korea to seriously reconsider their plans," Mr. Fowle told Fox News. During his time in prison he was coached into writing a confession of guilt, which he was then forced to rewrite over and over again. After being in prison for nearly 6 months, Mr. Fowle was finally released back to his family in October 2014. 9 p.m. BST, speaking about the latest detention of a U.S. citizen, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer told reporters, "Obviously, this is concerning. We're well aware of it and we're going to work through the Embassy of Sweden through our State Department to seek the release of the individuals there." Both the US and the UK do not have diplomatic relations with North Korea, so any negotiations are down through the Swedish embassy in Pyongyang. China demands Trump remove Armada Admiral in return for tempting North Korea prize. China has demanded the removal of one of Donald Trump's top admirals in return for a deal over North Korea. The Chinese government visited the president's opulent Mar-a-Lago estate in April to discuss the possibility of a deal. According to Japanese news agency Kyodo News, the Chinese delegate requested that U.S. Pacific Commander Harry Harris be removed from duty. In exchange they promised increased sanctions against North Korea which could paralyze Kim Jong Un's nuclear armament efforts. Harris, commander of Donald Trump's Armada in the Sea of Japan, has emphasized the need to pressure China and North Korea. He also ordered the aircraft carrier Carl Vinson and its Navy strike group to be deployed near the Korean peninsula in the move which caused great concern in Beijing. Harris has also pushed for the deadly THAAD missile system to be deployed in South Korea. The proposal in particular caused outrage among the Chinese government, which claims the deployment threatens its national security and regional strategic balances. Tensions between China and the U.S. are at an all-time high. The U.S. told China on Sunday to topple Kim Jong Un or face the consequences of an American intervention. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's Armada continues to prowl near the North Korean coast. Last week, the ships conducted joint exercises with the Japanese Navy in a move intended to strike fear into the heart of the tubby tyrant. Trump preparing for war with Russia? U.S. tanks and guns filmed heading to Europe. A W train was spotted hurtling towards Europe packed with hundreds of U.S. tanks and munitions, sparking fears Donald Trump is preparing for a conflict with Russia. The U.S. president's ever-escalating war of words with North Korean tyrant Kim Jong Un could lead to a war with Russia, according to Kremlin lawmakers. Vladimir Putin even personally called Trump, in a desperate attempt to prevent military action. But chilling footage has now surfaced showing a huge convoy of military equipment and tanks traveling out of the US, towards Europe. In the video, which lasts more than 8 minutes, trucks, artillery and army containers are also seen moving towards South Florida. The cameraman was left stunned by the encounter and claimed the train wasn't simply going back to base. "I'm ex-Army, and this is baffling even to my active duty buddies," he wrote in the caption to the YouTube video, posted on Saturday, May 6. "Can't figure out where they are going to. If they were going to Afghanistan or a similar area, they would have left from the West Coast, not Florida. If they were going to Afghanistan or a similar area, they would have left from the West Coast, not Florida." North Korea vows to strike first in nuclear attack threat to U.S. Kim Jong Un's North Korea has launched a violent rant against the U.S. and the UN, again threatening the world with a devastating nuclear attack. Tensions between the secretive Hermit Kingdom and the rest of the world have been lurching towards boiling point in recent weeks. North Korea threatened to reduce the White House to ashes this weekend after another American citizen was taken hostage. And Kim has once again stoked these tensions by promising to ratchet up his nuclear program. A spokesman for the Institute for American Studies of the Foreign Ministry of the DPRK launched an epic rant on behalf of Kim. He said, "The DPRK will bolster the capabilities for Korean-style preemptive nuclear attack at remarkably higher pace as it has already clarified as long as the U.S. continues its hostile policy toward the DPRK and vicious nuclear threat and blackmail." He continued, "If the UN Security Council does not call the U.S. to account for its aggressive and provocative large-scale joint military exercises and ICBM launches, the DPRK will not recognize any UNSC's resolution taken over the DPRK's ballistic rocket launches but continue to disclose the absurdity of the UN-sanctioned resolutions. No one is entitled to find fault with the DPRK's exercise of its just right to defend its sovereignty and right to existence." He added that the U.S. is being contradictory by carrying out its own tests. The spokesman said, "The U.S. maintains it may carry out missile launches but the DPRK cannot, and that its launches are contribution to peace and security while the DPRKs are provocation straining tension. The sophism is the height of double-dealing standards." Satellite images appear to show the North Korean nuclear site is ready. Kim's last missile test, launched a week ago, was deemed a failure despite claims of imminent war by the DPRK. Both Russia and China have called for calm in the region. U.S. Congress voted through plans for further sanctions on North Korea, which Russia warned could be considered a declaration of war. North Korea has detained a U.S. citizen on suspicion of hostile acts against the regime, the state-run Korean Central News Agency reported Sunday. The regime described Kim Hak-song as a man who was doing business in relation to the operation of Pyongyang University of Science and Technology. KCNA said the American was detained Saturday, but did not release more details on his alleged crime. He is the second U.S. professor working at Pyongyang University of Science and Technology to be detained in recent months, taking the total number of U.S. citizens detained by the state to 4. In a statement, Pyongyang University of Science and Technology said Kim was doing agricultural development work with the university's agricultural farm. The relevant authority is currently carrying out a detailed investigation into the crime of Kim Hak-song, the state-run news agency said. The English version of the state-run Korean Central News Agency identified the detained citizen as Jin Zoo-song, a Chinese version of the name Kim Hak-song. Kim, an ethnic Korean, was born in Jilin, China and educated at a university in California, two people who said they studied with him in the United States told CNN. They described Kim as being committed to improving North Korea's agricultural economy. Classmate David Kim said that Kim Hak-song came to the United States in the mid-1990s. He was a very diligent, hard-working man determined to help people in North Korea, David Kim said. He said that Kim Hak-song became U.S. citizen in the 2000s and returned to China after about 10 years of living in the United States. He still has family members in China and Korea, David Kim said. Kim Hak-song also majored in agriculture at a university in Yanbian, China, and 2 years ago went to Pyongyang, according to David Kim. Professor Kim was a man who would call North Korea as his own country. He went to Pyongyang to devote himself to the development of North Korea's agricultural technology so that the North can be self-sufficient with food, David Kim said. Kim Hak-song ran projects aimed at improving agricultural yields at Pyongyang University of Science and Technology, David Kim said. As he struggled to fund some of his projects, he would spend money out of his own pocket, David Kim said. David Lee, who also said he studied with Kim Hak-song in the U.S., said Kim and his colleagues would send food to North Korea. Kim had been very concerned about the food shortage in North Korea. Lee said, "North Korea is persecuting their savior, a person who came to help them. This is wrong," Lee said. State Department aware of reports. A State Department official told CNN the United States is aware of reports that an American citizen was detained. When a U.S. citizen is reported to be detained in North Korea, we work with the Swedish embassy in Pyongyang, which serves as the United States protecting power in North Korea, the official said. Due to privacy considerations, we have no further comment. In April, KCNA said another man, Tony Kim, also known as Kim Sang-duk, was detained for hostile acts toward the North Korean regime. He was teaching at Pyongyang University of Science and Technology, a statement from the school said then. Otto Warmbier, a University of Virginia student, was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor in 2016 for removing a political sign. And Kim Dong-chul, the president of a company involved in international trade and hotel services, was arrested in 2015 and is serving 10 years on espionage charges. Americans detained in North Korea. Kim Dong-chul, the president of a company involved in international trade and hotel services, was arrested in 2015 and is serving 10 years on espionage charges. Otto Warmbier, a University of Virginia student, was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor in 2016 for removing a political sign. Kim Sang-duk, also known as Tony Kim, a university professor, was detained in Pyongyang in 2017 and accused of attempting to overthrow the government. Kim Hak-song, a native Korean born in China, Jin Zu-song is the Chinese version of his name, and professor working at the same university as Tony Kim was detained May 6 on suspicion of hostile acts against the regime. Kenneth Bai served nearly 2 years of hard labor after accusations he was part of a Christian plot to overthrow the regime. Matthew Todd Miller was also accused of hostile acts after tearing up his tourist visa and seeking asylum after entering North Korea. Jeffrey Fowle spent 5 months in a North Korean prison after being caught with a Bible inside the country. North Korea has hit out at the United Nations for keeping mum about aggressive American missile tests. The Hermit States Foreign Ministry accused the U.S. of escalating tension on the peninsula with their intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, launches. A spokesman for North Korea's ministry said Donald Trump had been provocative and warned of a response if he carried on in the same manner. He said, the U.S. claims the 2 ICBM test fires conducted just in a little over 1 week were planned 1 year ago and they have nothing to do with the DPRK's nuclear and long-range ballistic missile launch. The UN Security Council has kept mum about the U.S. test fire of ICBM which flew more than 6,000 kilometers across the ocean, even while crying out for denunciation and sanctions as for ballistic rocket test fires the DPRK carried out in its own territorial land and waters. The UN Security Council, which calls into question only the DPRK's ballistic rocket test fires while turning an unseeing eye to the US ICBM test fires under the pressure of Washington's high-handed and arbitrary practices, deserves the name of double-dealing. Standard Security Council or US Security Council. Kim Jong Un's foreign minister warned the UN's lack of condemnation was moving the situation in North Korea to graver phase. This ominous warning was followed by a bizarre claim North Korea was pushing for peace across the world, despite repeated claims from pot-bellied dictator Kim Jong Un he will reduce his Western enemies to debris. He said, in order to realize genuine international justice and build a fair and peaceful world, the U.S. double-dealing yardstick must be broken and the UN Security Council moving at the beck and call of the U.S. must be reformed. No one is entitled to find fault with the DPRK's exercise of its just right to defend its sovereignty and right to existence. It comes after Kim Jong Un attempted to start WW3 by securing the support of 10 states in his battle against the US. In a bizarre letter sent to the Asian countries, including Vietnam and Thailand, he warned of a nuclear holocaust across the continent if he did not secure the required support. Kim Jong Un's erratic behavior is becoming increasingly problematic for China, but what are the relations between North Korea and China? China has been one of North Korea's long-standing allies, trading partners and source of food and energy since the country's creation post-WW3. Historically, it has also been an opponent of any sanctions coming from the international community and the United Nations. In February 2014, China openly criticized a UN report which outlined the human rights abuse in North Korea, involving torture, forced starvation and crimes against humanity. But it is likely China has done so not out of altruistic reasons, but to avoid a regime collapse and influx of refugees. Bethany Allen Ebrahimian, an assistant editor at Foreign Policy, said China is always careful in its handling of the North Korean situation. China fears that harsher sanctions may destabilize its northern neighbor, which could potentially send millions of refugees over the border, she said. But recent missile tests, and growing international pressure, have only narrowed Beijing's options. Korea's and China's history were intertwined for a period of time in the early 20th century when a Japanese occupation swept through the region. This gave rise to various Marxist groups and guerrilla fighters who would later dominate the region. When Japan left the Korean peninsula in August of 1945, the USSR installed a communist government in the north with Kim Il-sung as its leader, handpicked by Joseph Stalin himself. Then in 1950 tensions escalated when the North invaded the South with military backing from China. Today the situation is much more complex, however, and China, who is no longer a pure Maoist state, is growing increasingly concerned with Kim Jong Un's actions. The seemingly steadfast relationship was challenged in 2006 when Pyongyang tested a nuclear device in October. In an unprecedented move, Beijing supported a UN Security Council resolution which imposed sanctions on North Korea. The strained relationship took another dive this year when Chinese President Xi Jinping halted all imports of coal from North Korea, the country's main source of income. Reportedly, some 2 million tons of coal were left stranded in Chinese ports as North Korean vessels were turned away. Nearly two-thirds of North Korea's trade is tied to China, which gives Beijing leverage over the isolated state. He told CNBC, "We're seeing some incremental steps that the Chinese may be in favor of doing more. I think China is signaling to both sides, to the US, that China is doing more, that China is acting in good faith to head off a crisis in North Korea. Primarily they're telling the US that ultimately China feels the only solution in North Korea is one that involves diplomacy and getting North Korea to the table. It is likely China will continue to put pressure on and try to rein in its troublesome neighbor, but at the same time avoid conflict." The presence of the US military and President Donald Trump's unpredictable behavior has only made the tension in the Korean peninsula more palpable. North Korea's nuclear program is becoming increasingly problematic, but as long as China prevents Kim Jong Un from pulling the war trigger, it can be considered North Korea's strongest ally. President Donald Trump is using Kim Jong Un as a diversion so he can launch a nuclear strike against ally China, it has been claimed. The US president is reportedly disguising Washington's defense strategy, which features an attack against Beijing, with a plan to curb North Korean nuclear aggression. International expert and author James Petras said Donald Trump is using America's hostile situation with North Korea to prepare his army and initiate a surprise attack on China. Mr. Petras said, "Washington's strategy is designed to contain and influence China if possible, and an extreme basis for launching a nuclear attack on China. I think the pretext of attacking North Korea is simply an excuse to build up U.S. military capabilities for a nuclear attack." Dane Chamorro, senior partner and head of ASEAN, Asian, at Control Risks, told CNBC the former business tycoon has been indirectly hostile to President Xi. Although the 70-year-old has been full of praise for his Chinese counterpart, Mr. Chamorro said the U.S. president wanted to scare Beijing when he launched 59 Tomahawk missiles to attack Syria. The expert said President Trump wanted to indirectly tell President Xi, "There's a new sheriff in town, I'm a little unpredictable and bad things will happen, things that you don't like unless you get Kim 3.0 under control." Referring to President Xi, in front of NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, Mr. Trump said last month, "I do not know Putin, but I do know this gentleman." He added, "I've spent a lot of time with him over the last 2 days and he's the president of China. You were there, most of you were there, and it was quite an interesting period of time. President Xi wants to do the right thing. We had a very good bonding, I think we had very good chemistry together. China must be prepared to topple Kim Jong Un or we'll do it," former U.S. chief claims. China must be prepared to destabilize North Korea and unseat Kim Jong Un, or face the consequences of American intervention, a former U.S. foreign policy chief has claimed. Condoleezza Rice, who served as Secretary of State during George W. Bush's administration, claimed China were too concerned about causing the collapse of dictator Kim Jong Un. Ms. Rice claimed Beijing must be prepared for instability on their border as the U.S. will intervene if the People's Republic of China do not. She added that in order to deal with the warmongering North strides towards a nuclear missile capable of striking the U.S., you have to change the Chinese calculus. Ms. Rice said, "I think that's what the administration's trying to do. They're worried most about the collapse of the regime, and their long border and instability on their border. But you have to say to them, even if you have to take very tough steps that might ultimately collapse the regime, you have to take steps because we will if you don't. And I think that's the message that you're starting to see." Ms. Rice claimed that Kim Jong Un was reckless, maybe even a bit unstable, and warned that the secret of state attempting to develop nuclear capabilities must be a red line for President Trump. She said, "That cannot be countenanced by any American president. I don't care who's in the White House." It comes as North Korea threatened to turn the White House to ashes with a nuclear strike as Kim Jong Un's regime warned the days of the U.S. are over. In a scathing 2,000-word editorial published by Kim Jong Un's state media agency KNCA, Pyongyang condemned President Trump's decision to dispatch naval forces to the Japan Sea and promised victory for the DPRK. The editorial read, "This is a stern warning to the U.S. imperialists and their stooges running amok for aggression and war moves. The world will clearly witness how the crime-woven history of the U.S. imperialists will be over, how the despicable remaining days of the South Korean puppet forces will come to an end, and how national reunification, the cherished desire of the Korean nation, will be achieved." While the international community and news media focus on North Korean missile tests and the country's nuclear program, one expert warned on Sunday that North Korea may be secretly assembling the capability to take out significant parts of the U.S. homeland via an electromagnetic pulse (EMP) attack. Dr. Peter Vincent Pry is Executive Director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security and is the Chief of Staff of the Congressional EMP Commission. Speaking on this Reporters Talk radio program, Pry pointed to 2 North Korean satellites that are currently orbiting the U.S. at trajectories he says are optimized for a surprised EMP attack. Aaron Klein Investigative Radio is broadcast on terrestrial radio on New York's AM 970 The Answer and News Talk 990 AM in Philadelphia and online. Pry was referring to the KMS-3-2 and KMS-4 Earth observation satellites launched by North Korea in April 2012 and February 2016 respectively. He warned, "They are positioning themselves as sort of a nuclear missile age, cyber-age version of the battleship diplomacy in my view. So that they can always have one of them, satellites, very close to being over the United States or over the United States. Then if a crisis comes up and if we decide to attack North Korea, Kim Jong Un can threaten our president and say, well, don't do that because we are going to burn your whole country down." Which is basically what he said. I mean, he has made threats about turning the United States into ashes, and he connected the satellite program to this in public statements to deter us from attacking. If you wanted to win a new Korean war, added Pry, one of the things you would certainly consider doing is taking out the United States homeland itself. Pry surmised the North Koreans may be taking the idea from a Soviet plan during the Cold War to attack the US with an EMP as part of a larger surprise assault aimed at crippling the US military. During the Cold War, the Russians had a secret weapon they called a fractional orbital bombardment system, he explained. And the idea was to do a surprise EMP attack against the United States by disguising a warhead as a satellite. Because a satellite trajectory is different from an ICBM trajectory that is aiming to go into a city. You know, for accuracy on an ICBM you launch it on a lower energy, 45-degree angle that follows a classic ballistic trajectory. Like a rifle. To land your missile on a city. Pry continued of the original Russian plan, but if you put a satellite in orbit it follows a different trajectory. It doesn't have accuracy, but it puts the satellite up there so that it stays in permanent orbit, so it looks different in terms of the trajectory. And guys watching their radar screens tend not to get alarmed when they see a missile being launched on that satellite trajectory. Because they assume it is for peaceful purposes. So, the idea was to put a nuclear weapon on a satellite. Launch it on a satellite trajectory toward the south so it is also flying away from the United States. Orbit it over the South Pole and come up on the other side of the Earth so that it approaches us from the south. Because we didn't during the Cold War, and even today we still don't have ballistic missile early radar warnings looking south. We don't have any national missile defenses to the south. We are blind and defenseless to the south. We can't see anything coming from that direction. Then when this gets over the United States you light it off so that it does an EMP attack. Pry stated that on the Soviet plan, they were mainly interested in paralyzing our strategic forces, our strategic command and control and communications, so that we couldn't talk to our forces. Maybe take out some of the forces themselves. And that would give them time to then launch their mass attack across the North Pole to blow up our ICBMs. So, kill them once with the EMP. Kill them twice by blasting our bases by using their long-range missiles. That was the Russian plan. But the cutting edge of the plan was this surprise EMP attack. North Korea, by contrast, doesn't have enough missiles or sophisticated missiles to blow up our missile bases and bomber bases. What they seem to be doing with the satellites is the EMP part of the Soviet plan. I think what they are mainly going for is the unhardened electric grid, Pry surmised. Transportation, communications, all of the other civilian critical infrastructure that we depend upon to keep our population alive. Pry spotlighted recent North Korean nuclear and missile tests minimized by the news media for reported failures. When viewed through the lens of potential preparations for an EMP attack, Pry warned, the tests were actually successes. Pry wrote about some of those tests in a Newsmax piece last week. I am looking at an unclassified US government chart that shows a 10-kiloton warhead, the power of the Hiroshima A-bomb, detonated at an altitude of 70 kilometers will generate an EMP field inflicting upset and damage on unprotected electronics. On April 30, South Korean officials told the Korea Times and YTN-TV that North Korea's test of a medium-range missile on April 29 was not a failure, as widely reported in the world press, because it was deliberately detonated at 72 kilometers altitude. 72 kilometers is the optimum burst height for a 10-carat warhead making an EMP attack. According to South Korean officials, it's believed the explosion was a test to develop a nuclear weapon different from existing ones. Japan's Tetsuro Kosaka writes in Nikkei, Pyongyang could be saying, we could launch an electromagnetic pulse, EMP, attack if things get really ugly. The April 29 missile launch looks suspiciously like practices for an EMP attack, Pry wrote. The missile was fired on a lofted trajectory, to maximize, not range, but climbing to high altitude as quickly as possible, where it was successfully fused and detonated, testing everything but an actual nuclear warhead. This weekend, an editorial published in the North Korean state-run media agency KNCA threatened the White House would be reduced to ashes. The same news agency warned last week that any military provocation against the DPRK will precisely mean a total war, which will lead to the final doom of the US. DPRK stands for the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or North Korea. Aaron Klein is Breitbart's Jerusalem bureau chief and senior investigative reporter. He is a New York Times best-selling author and hosts the popular weekend talk radio program, Aaron Klein Investigative Radio. Follow him on Twitter at Aaron Klein Show. Follow him on Facebook,